You're allowed.
Okay, this is the conference on H.454. We're back on June 11th. And we have distributed, I haven't? Okay. So let me just, a little background here. As I mentioned, let me even back up from that and say, everybody at this table, and I assume everybody in this room, cares deeply about the education of Vermont's children. And everybody's trying to get it right. I think I'm kind of reflecting, you said something similar this morning. We're, the discussion for since January has been about how to do it and how the pieces fit together. As I said, we spent time with the House proposal yesterday. And we, based on that, we put together a proposal yesterday afternoon, kind of a response document. But following this morning, some of it is maybe a little bit more in flux than we had imagined it might be. And so I think even though we have some language, if you will, in the second half of the bill, I don't think we want to go to that yet. In fact, I think what also, and just for everybody here, what I see is a pretty short session right now, looking at policy areas that we want to talk about. And of course, everything's policy, but the first part of the bill. And then I think both the House negotiators and the Senate negotiators need to spend some time with JFO, doing some additional analysis, some additional thinking. And I think the plan would be, say it now, so you can have this in mind, that we spend a few minutes now and then break till 4. We had a quick discussion ahead of time about doing that. So with that, I would ask Council St. James up. And John, even though I had put you on notice, you're not gonna do your part yet.
Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. Would you like me to share my screen?
Sure. And one just additional bit of setup here is, thinking about the needs of rural Vermont, which I know we all, everybody cares about urban Vermont, rural Vermont, and everything in between. But part of what we're going to talk about now is really focused on rural Vermont and making sure that rural Vermont, well, nobody wants rural Vermont left behind, so we just want to make sure it's not left behind. Let's just put this together. But
So posted on the Senate Education website should be the Senate Proposal Draft 1.1. Any language that is not highlighted appeared in the House version 3.1 this morning.
Thank you.
So the only, the highlighting is representing language that is different from House Proposal Draft 3.1. So you'll see there's no highlighting in section 1. There is some highlighting in section 2. So section 2 is the Commission on the Future of Public Education. And if you go to page 13.
I will resist the urge to editorialize as we go along and just wait for questions and come back to these. So let's do it. And no editorializing one way.
Page 13. This is in the charge of the Commission on the Future of Public Education. So what the Senate is proposing is to incorporate all of the House's most recent suggestions, but to modify the second charge here regarding school closure to read. So the recommendations shall include a process for a community served by a school to have a voice in decisions regarding school closures. And then I probably should have modified that further. recommendations for what that process shall entail. So the House language was whether there should be a process for a community served by an elementary school to have a voice in decisions. And the Senate language is saying, what is the process? So in section 3, the school district redistricting task force on page 19, subdivision 1 here, proposed new school districts. The Senate is proposing to add or supervisory unions and supervisory districts shall, and then again, the Senate is proposing to add the term generally, have an average daily membership of not fewer than 4,000 and not more than 8,000 pre-K through grade 12 students. And then in subdivision 2, proposed new school districts or supervisory unions and supervisory districts shall also be to the greatest extent possible, etc.
Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question? The term generally, is that different than approximately from a legal standpoint?
In this context, no.
Okay.
Just on this, particularly, I assume this was probably done
Correct.
before we corrected it.
Okay, cool, thanks.
I was almost amused when I saw your language.
Okay, great.
Trying to get to the same place with one of this. So how we do that?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Like, is there a technical thing here? I don't know.
No further changes recommended in section 3. No changes recommended in section 4. In section 6, education quality standards, this is the class size minimums section on page 28. The Senate is proposing to remove kindergarten from class size minimums, to exempt kindergarten. So instead of the average class size minimum for kindergarten and first grade, it would just read now first grade. And then further down in the list of types of courses that are exempt, kindergarten is also listed. Can go right to Senator Bongart's. Can we jump right to section 21? Is that the next change?
Okay. Page 52?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So page 52, section 21, the amendment to section 828 and title 16, tuition to approved schools. The Senate is proposing that an approved independent school that's located in Vermont, in order to receive public tuition, it would need to have at least 25% of its Vermont resident student enrollment composed of students attending on a district funded tuition basis. And then I believe that's the last proposed change in the education. Oh, nope. On page 58, the Senate is proposing removing or deleting sections 27 and 28, which are section 27 in the House proposal was the amendment to 16 VSA 823, the tuition statute. And that in the House proposal would take effect contingent on essentially when the foundation formula sprang into effect. And section 28 in the House proposal were all of the conforming repeals that would be repealing the language that would not be needed related to the current law and tuition program. This proposal from the Senate is proposing to delete those sections. And there was one other change that I will note, section 11. I will get that. Page number for you, 36. Thank you. Page 36, section 11 is the prohibition on school closure and transition to paying tuition. The substance of the Senate is not proposing to change the substance of this section from the House proposal. They are proposing to make this section contingently effective the same time the foundation formula would take effect with all of the same contingencies. So in the effective date section, you'll now see section 11 nestled in with the sections related to the foundation formula and the contingencies related to those.
I think it's time to editorialize.
I have a context question that seemed beyond that. I actually don't know you might know the answer to it if you don't mind. Do you have how many students attend full day? What percentage of kindergarten students are full day pre-K or full day K students?
I don't know that, but
Okay.
but you are hitting on the reason that we just
Okay, great.
thought it made
Okay.
sense to take it.
Okay. Thanks.
And
Bye.
as Beth reminded us, it's not mandatory, but the age is over that, so it probably just makes sense to pick that up.
The deletion of section 27 and 28, could you just describe what that means? What sort of the impact of that is?
So if the legislature were to take no further action and this bill and the foundation formula were to become effective on July 1, 2028, or whatever date you all settle on, without sections 27 and 28, and without any future action by the legislature, the town tuition program would remain as is.
All right, yes. Maybe you should talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so a little background. When, number one, this is no change. The way it's worked in my area for almost 200 years, so just the same as it does now. When the Senate Education Committee was working on this bill, there was a high school weight of 10%. At that point with the high school weight, the independent schools said, that's okay. We will give up the ability to set tuition because with the high school weight, it's fair. And they said that, the number, it's actually, a couple of them said it's a little bit less money, but it's close and it's fair. And we'll just do that. And then the high school weight went away. And now they're going, we will not have enough money to stay afloat. And I think, and I understand the language about looking at it later and, seeing what pops up. But from the perspective of those of us who represent areas with a lot of independent schools, going back and saying, well, we took away your ability to survive, but don't worry, a future legislature is going to fix it. This isn't going to fly. And I think it's also worth keeping in mind that the independent schools have always worked with their communities and worked within the confines of available dollars. And this just doesn't change anything. And when the time comes that this goes into effect and more research is done, they volunteered to give that up once. And there's no reason to think that, if it's fair, that wouldn't happen again. But in the short run, the thought of having no mechanism, no control, and no weight, again, is like they're viewing it as an existential threat. And I understand, I understand that the notion of saying, well, we're looking at it, and if there is one, that's just not an effective response. It's not anyone's fault. It's not. I don't say that to be argumentative. It's just not going to work.
Right, so.
I have a question about that if you're about to move on to a new section.
No, I wasn't. I was going to ask a question.
Oh, then
about
go
that.
for it.
So you just said that they've always worked within the confines of the available money, but this is really the opposite of that. This is saying that if the available money is the foundation formula, that independent schools still need to have the ability to set their tuition,
Yeah, my response.
which might be outside the confines of the available.
I mean, it theoretically could be, but it would require that they operate differently than they have for the last 200 years. Because they've always worked with their communities, because they're so integral to the community. There's no reason to think that will be any different. The difference is that when you have a single weight, districts will be able to move money to high schools or elementary schools, depending on where the need is. That won't exist for these schools because they're independent. So when was there, the dollars would follow the student to these schools, and there was a high school weight, they went, okay, that's fair, we'll give up the ability to set tuition. But absent that, one of those two things, then it's,
So if we sort of come up with this foundation formula and said this is the amount needed to educate a student plus the weights and all of that, and independent schools continue to charge a tuition that is set, and that's higher than the foundation formula dollars, where does that difference get made up?
well, I think they would have to do it within, I mean, I will say personally, I have no doubt that within in SD, you're going to see more money going to high schools than you are going to the elementary schools, because I don't think there's anywhere in the world that costs less to run a high school, the same to run a high school as it does an elementary school. I understand. But we do know that, from the allowable tuition rate, the current spending is one high school is 12% higher, 12.5% higher. They're willing to take 10 at the time. There's one close enough. But we know it costs more right now. We're spending 12.5% more. So the thought of, losing that is viewed as an existential threat. And we have to have a way to ensure them. And frankly, again, these schools have always worked with their communities and always worked within the system in a way that's always been viewed as, I will admit there's been some grumbling here and there, but in the grand scheme of things, always worked within the system and with their schools, and that's what would happen now. It wouldn't be any different than it's been the last 200 years.
I can see that. I think that the challenge here is that no longer can districts say, well, if we need more money for tuition, we'll just
Raise more money.
raise more money, because that's not, we're talking about a foundation formula. So the available money is limited.
I think,
Well,
go ahead.
you're giving them the money to run a pre-K through 12 system, but they're not operating a pre-K through 12 system. So, yeah, maybe a little bit more money goes to the 9 through 12 population, but if they were operating a 9 through 12, they would do that anyhow to operate that high school. They would fungible, they would shift the money over there. All you're doing now is you're still shifting the money over to your 9 through 12 population. You're just doing it through a tuition amount instead of making the decision within the district to send more money over to that 9 through 12 population. There's really no difference.
I think I'm struggling to get clear on partly like why you're sure that any system would shift the money to 9 to 12, but also if we're sort of declaring in the law, this is how much it costs to educate a student, and then saying in the same law, it's unfair to say this is how much it costs to educate a student, it's not enough. I'm not sure what that says to all of the folks who are hustling to manage a public high school given that many many principals and folks who work in public high schools around the state are really, really nervous right now that they're going to get underfunded under this foundation formula. And so I'm struggling to see just how to work that out in the mix.
I understand
I think.
I think I understand how if we using a whole district, we ran into this with childcare where you got paid the same rate. When we let off the 3-year-olds, it became they couldn't use that money that they were using to offset the additional costs for infants. And a lot of places had issues. I think the issue is if we are assuming that every place in Vermont does not operate a K through 12 school. We have had one updated study that says it doesn't cost any more to educate, all right, a high school student. That's in the face of longstanding tradition, that it has cost more to educate a high school student. And these schools are essential to their communities. We can't replace.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, they are taking a hit on tuition by going to the, base and getting the educational payment. But they have less flexibility to move things around than a superintendent that's got K-12 to move things around. They've only got 9-12. And so I think, and we've got a thing in there that says you will study a weight for high school, but it doesn't there talk about, is there a difference, in cost between a whole district and just a 9-12 high school, an independently standing high school. And on the face of things, I'm sure superintendents that have been getting a 10% weight are nervous. And we don't know what kind of data got put in January or December when the update went in. We know, depending on which inflation factor you use, it makes a difference up or down. So we seem to be making some schools more nervous than others because they have less flexibility.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that everyone in the whole state who's paying any attention is nervous right now for a wide variety of reasons. And I'm not saying, and I think we're trying to tend
Yes.
to everyone in this bill and to make sure that kids are better off. So I'm not arguing, I'm just trying to understand the thinking there.
One way to
Yeah.
think about it is if it was K through 12.
Yeah.
And the number gets set on the cost of educating K through 12. The district can move the money up or down.
Yeah.
Depending on where the independent schools have zero ability to do that.
I think there's.
They are going to get moved to upper, and we just have to make sure that.
I think there's an assumption in the bill that came from the data we received that it actually, despite what we might sort of see from a quick scan of the data or whatever it is, there is no statistically significant difference in educating the two groups. And I think that's for why it's, elementary schools are much smaller. So they are more expensive for that. There's all kinds of reasons, right? And so I think that's the assumption built in here. And that's why the moving the money around makes less sense. But I hear what you're saying about how you think schools really operate. Yeah.
And frankly, that hasn't been peer reviewed, hasn't, the underlying assumptions haven't been tested. And we just can't go on that.
Yeah.
The data from AOE says it's 12.5%.
Yeah, and I don't quite understand that, given that the agency's proposal from APA.
Well, I think in a lot of ways, they were looking at a pre-K through 12 system.
Yeah.
And I think that's,
Just-
I mean, if you're in a pre-K through 12 system, there's no reason for grade weights. It's all just fungible, but
Yeah.
not everybody's in a pre-K through 12.
Yeah, no, and different money's fungible in different systems differently, right? But there's other parts of the bill. Yes, I feel like we all understand each other.
I don't think so. That's sort of the area previously. Understand the kindergarten change. Chris, do you have any further questions?
No, thank you though.
Yeah, I would agree. Thank you. I do feel like we continue every time we sit back down here, we keep moving in the direction coming together.
Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So why don't we break? I guess I would say, I would just ask if we are, I'm not saying we will be, but if 3 o'clock is more reasonable, should we try to come back at 3, or shall we just kind of stick to 4 as a?
Well, we could, what do we, I mean,
So I know for the public's sake, we probably need to set a fixed time, so maybe we should just stick with 4.
Yeah, I think 4 is fine.
Okay.
okay, we could try. Okay,
3:30?
yeah, I mean, why don't we,
I would say 3:30, and if we happen to delay, we'll delay.
okay, so for the people at home, we're gonna shoot for 3:30 and like plan for that, and we might just punt for an extra half.
What's this we can't compromise?
Yeah, there we go.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah.